I sat at the far end of that dining table, staring at crystal glasses I'd never own and silverware too heavy for my calloused hands. The chandelier above sparkled like a cruel joke, casting light on everything I wasn't. My daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, wine glass tilting in her perfectly manicured fingers. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who'd already decided I was worth nothing. 60 years old and not a single thing to your name, she said, her voice light, almost playful. No house, no savings, nothing. How does someone live that long and have nothing to show for it? My son looked down at his plate. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. I felt my throat tighten, my hands trembling in my lap. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything, but I didn't. I just sat there, swallowing the shame like bitter medicine, praying for the strength to keep my secret buried a little longer. She laughed then, a sharp sound that cut through the air. I guess some people just aren't meant to succeed, she said. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the marble floor. My son finally looked up, but his eyes were empty. The boy who used to hold my hand was gone. Before you go anywhere, let me tell you, this isn't just another story you'll scroll past. This is the kind of story that reminds you why you should never judge a book by its cover. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. I walked out of that mansion with my head held high, my heart breaking, and a secret they'd never see coming. They say memory is selective, that we only hold onto what matters. But for me, every scar, every sacrifice, every moment of struggle, it's all there, etched into my bones like a map of survival. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when I believed in fairy tales, when I thought love could conquer poverty and promises meant something. I married young, to a man whose words were sweeter than his actions. We had a tiny apartment with walls so thin you could hear the neighbors breathing, but it was ours, or so I thought. Then my son was born, and everything changed. I held him in my arms, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I made a silent vow. I would give him everything I never had. I would sacrifice whatever it took to make sure he never felt small, never felt forgotten. But his father didn't share that dream. He left on a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary day that shouldn't hold so much weight. No dramatic goodbye, no explanation, just an empty closet and a note that said he couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't do us. I cried for 3 days straight. Then I dried my tears and got to work. The jobs came slowly at first. I cleaned hotel rooms, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets for tourists who never saw my face. I worked night shifts at a laundromat, folding other people's clothes while my son slept in a basket beside the machines. I took every opportunity, every extra hour, every dollar I could scrape together, and I saved. Every single cent that wasn't spent on rent or food or keeping my boy alive, I saved. People didn't understand. Neighbors whispered about the woman who wore the same coat for 10 winters, who never bought new furniture, who clipped coupons like her life depended on it. They thought I was just poor. They didn't know I was building something. My son grew up watching me work. He saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the way my hands trembled from scrubbing floors, the nights I went to bed without dinner so he could have seconds. And for a long time, he was grateful. He'd hug me tight and say, "One day, I'm going to take care of you. One day, you won't have to work so hard." I believed him. But life has a way of twisting even the purest intentions. When he turned 18, he left for college, a small state school. Nothing fancy, but it was his dream. I paid for every semester, every textbook, every meal plan. I told him not to worry about money, that I'd handle it. And I did, even when it meant taking on extra shifts, even when my back screamed in protest, even when I could barely stand. He graduated with honors. I sat in the audience, tears streaming down my face, watching him walk across that stage. I thought, this is it. This is what I've been working for. But he didn't come home. He got a job in the city, moved into an apartment I'd never seen, started building a life that didn't include me. Phone calls became less frequent, visits even rarer. And when he did come by, it was always rushed, always distracted, always with an excuse about how busy he was. Then he met her. She walked into his life like she owned it, all designer handbags and sharp opinions. From the moment I met her, I knew. She looked at me the way people look at stray dogs, with pity and disgust. She asked what I did for a living, and when I told her I was retired, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Retired from what, exactly?" I didn't tell her about the decades of cleaning, the sacrifice, the silent suffering. I just smiled and changed the subject, but she didn't let it go. Over the months, her comments grew sharper, more pointed. She'd ask why I didn't own a house, why I still lived in a small rental, why I never traveled or bought nice things. My son would laugh nervously, try to steer the conversation away, but he never defended me, not once. Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. The wedding was small, elegant, everything I could never afford. I sat in the back row, wearing my best dress, a simple navy blue one I'd owned for years. She wore white lace and diamonds, and when she looked at me during the reception, her smile was cold, victorious. After they married, the distance grew. My son stopped calling altogether. When I reached out, his responses were short, clipped, as if I was an inconvenience. I told myself he was just busy, that marriage changes people, that he still loved me deep down. But then came that dinner, the one where I sat at the end of their grand dining table, surrounded by luxury I'd paid for but would never enjoy. The one where she mocked me, belittled me, reduced my entire life to nothing. And my son said nothing. That night, I drove home in silence, tears blurring the road ahead. I thought about all the years I'd spent sacrificing, all the dreams I'd given up, all the love I'd poured into a boy who no longer saw me. But I also thought about the one thing they didn't know, the one secret I'd kept hidden for decades. I wasn't poor. I never had been. Every dollar I'd saved, every investment I'd made in silence, every account I'd opened under my own name, it had grown. Slowly, steadily, invisibly. I'd built a fortune in the shadows, not because I wanted to hoard it, but because I wanted to protect it. I'd seen what money did to people, how it twisted hearts and poisoned relationships. So I lived small, stayed quiet, and watched. And what I saw broke my heart. My son had been in my will. 4 years. Everything I'd built was meant for him. But that night, driving home with shame burning in my chest, I made a decision. The next morning, I called my lawyer. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and expensive leather, the kind of place where secrets are kept and futures are decided. I sat across from Mr. Harrison, a man I'd trusted for over 20 years, watching him flip through documents with the careful precision of someone who understood that every word mattered. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, his eyes soft with concern. "It's a significant change." I nodded, my hands folded in my lap. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he sighed. The kind of sigh that carries the weight of understanding. I've known you a long time. I've watched you build this fortune from nothing, and I've never once seen you spend it on yourself. Are you sure you won't regret this? The only thing I regret is waiting this long. He nodded slowly, making notes on the legal pad in front of him. So, to be clear, you're removing your son and daughter-in-law from the will entirely. The estate, valued at approximately $8.3 million, will now be distributed to the charitable organizations we discussed. Yes. The words felt like release, like finally setting down a burden I'd carried for too long. I thought about my son, about the boy who'd once promised to take care of me, and I felt a deep, aching sadness. But beneath that sadness was something else, something that felt like freedom. And the personal bequest to yourself? Mr. Harrison asked. You've allocated funds for your own retirement, travel, anything you might want to finally enjoy? I smiled, a real smile for the first time in months. Yes, it's time I started living for myself. He began organizing the papers, his movements methodical and calm. I'll have these documents prepared by the end of the week. Once you sign, the changes will be the door to the reception area creaked open. The sound faint but distinct. Mr. Harrison paused, glancing toward the door, then continued. As I was saying, once you sign, everything will be finalized. No one will have access to information about your estate unless you choose to share it. I nodded, but something felt wrong. A prickling sensation crept up my spine. The kind of instinct that comes from years of being invisible, of noticing things others miss. Harrison walked me to the door a few minutes later, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. You're doing the right thing, he said quietly. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. I stepped into the reception area, and that's when I saw them. My son and daughter-in-law were standing by the window, their backs rigid, their faces pale. They didn't move when they saw me. They didn't speak. They just stared, and in that moment, I knew. They'd heard everything. My daughter-in-law's mouth opened slightly, her eyes wide with shock. My son looked like he'd been struck, his face drained of color, his hands trembling at his sides. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, but I kept my expression calm, neutral. I walked past them without a word, my head held high, and pushed through the glass doors into the bright afternoon sun. Behind me, I heard her voice, sharp and frantic. 8 million? Did she say 8 million? I didn't look back. The next few days were a blur. I waited for the phone to ring, for my son to call, to demand an explanation, to beg for forgiveness. But the silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Then, on the 4th day, he showed up at my door. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled, his hair uncombed. He stood on my doorstep, shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to meet my gaze. Can I come in? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, letting him pass. He walked into my small living room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. The worn couch, the faded curtains, the simple kitchen table where I'd fed him countless meals, it all seemed to register differently. Now, he sat down heavily, his hands clasped between his knees. I didn't know, he said finally. I didn't know you had money. I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. Would it have mattered? He flinched at the question, his jaw tightening. That's not fair, isn't it? I turned to face him, my voice steady. You let her mock me. You sat there at that table and said nothing while she tore me apart. Would you have defended me if you'd known I was rich? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence was answer enough. She's upset, he said finally. She thinks you've been lying to us. I've been lying to protect myself. To see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer. His face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I've been terrible. I know I let her influence me. But I love you. I do. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to reach out and hold him the way I had when he was small. When the world was simple and love was enough. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. The next week, something unexpected happened. I was sitting at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and warm lighting, when a man approached my table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up, startled. He was close to my age, maybe a few years older, with kind eyes and a worn baseball cap. There was something about him that felt safe, familiar. "No." "Go ahead," I said. He sat down, ordered a coffee, and we started talking. His name was David, and he was a retired teacher who spent his days volunteering at the community center and tending to his garden. He didn't ask about my past, didn't pry into my life. He just listened, laughed at my stories, and treated me like I mattered. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a mother, not as a source of money, not as someone to be pitied, just as a person. We started meeting regularly, always at that same cafe, always with the same easy conversation. He made me feel light, hopeful, like maybe there was still something beautiful waiting for me. And then, one afternoon, my son and daughter-in-law walked into the cafe. They saw me immediately, their eyes locking onto David with suspicion and calculation. My daughter-in-law's expression shifted, her smile suddenly bright and false as they approached the table. "There you are," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "We've been looking everywhere for you. We wanted to apologize properly. Maybe take you to dinner?" My son nodded eagerly, his eyes darting between me and David. "Yeah, we thought we could talk." "Really talk?" I looked at them, at their desperate faces, at the transparent hunger in their eyes. They didn't want to reconcile. They wanted back into the will. David glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I reached over and placed my hand on his, a small gesture that said everything. "I'm busy," I said calmly, "but thank you for the offer." My daughter-in-law's smile faltered, her mask slipping. "We just want to make things right," she said, her voice tight. "Then you should have thought about that before." I stood up, David rising with me. We walked out together, leaving them standing there, speechless and exposed. Outside, David turned to me, his expression serious. "Are you okay?" I nodded, feeling something shift inside me, something powerful and new. For the first time in my life, I'm more than okay. The phone calls started the next day. First, it was my son, his voice strained and desperate. "We need to talk. Please. Just give me a chance to explain." I hung up. Then my daughter-in-law called, her tone sugary and false. "I know we got off on the wrong foot. I'd love to make it right. Maybe we could meet for lunch?" I blocked the number. The texts came next, dozens of them, filling my phone with apologies and excuses and thinly veiled desperation. My son claimed he'd been blind, that he let his wife control him, that he wanted to rebuild our relationship. She claimed she'd misunderstood me, that she'd been stressed and said things she didn't mean. But I knew the truth. They didn't want me. They wanted my money. David noticed the change in me. We were sitting on a bench by the lake, watching the sunset paint the water gold. When he gently asked, "What's bothering you?" I told him everything. About the humiliation at the dinner table, about overhearing them at the lawyer's office, about the sudden flood of attention now that they knew I was wealthy. He listened without interruption, his hand finding mine, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want them to understand what they've done. I want them to see me, really see me, and face what they've lost. Then let them." The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My son's birthday was approaching, and traditionally, his wife threw an elaborate party at their mansion. This year, she sent me an invitation, hand-delivered with a note written in careful script. "Please come. We miss you. Let's celebrate as a family." I stared at the invitation for a long time, feeling the weight of the decision. David sat beside me, his presence steady and calm. "Are you going?" he asked. "Yes, but not alone." The night of the party, David picked me up wearing a simple suit, his eyes warm with encouragement. "You look beautiful," he said, and for the first time in years, I believed it. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion, nothing extravagant but elegant, a deep emerald green that made me feel strong. I'd styled my hair, put on lipstick, and wore the pearl earrings I'd kept hidden in a box for decades. When we arrived at the mansion, the driveway was lined with luxury cars. Music and laughter spilled from the open doors, and I felt my stomach tighten with anxiety. David squeezed my hand. "You've got this," he whispered. We walked in together, and the room fell silent. My son stood near the fireplace, a champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. My daughter-in-law was by the bar, her smile brittle and forced as she took in my appearance, my confidence. And the man standing beside me, "You came," my son said, his voice cracking slightly. I did. The party resumed slowly, conversations picking up in awkward bursts. But I could feel the eyes on me, the whispers, the questions. Who was this woman who'd been mocked and dismissed, now walking in like she belonged? David stayed close, introducing himself with easy charm, treating me with respect and affection that made my daughter-in-law's jaw tighten with jealousy. We were standing by the windows, looking out at the garden, when my son approached. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with his glass. "Can we talk?" he asked, his eyes pleading. "Privately, anything you need to say, you can say in front of David." His face flushed, but he nodded. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how I treated you, and I know I can't undo it. But I want to try. I want us to be a family again, do you?" I asked, my voice steady. "Or do you want access to my estate?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. "That's not fair, isn't it? You ignored me for years. You let your wife humiliate me. You never once stood up for me, never once chose me over her opinion. And now, suddenly, you want to be my son again. What changed?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know you had money, and that's exactly the problem. You should have loved me regardless. You should have defended me because I'm your mother, not because of what I could give you." The room had gone quiet again, guests pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. My daughter-in-law appeared beside my son, her face tight with barely concealed anger. "This is a party," she said, her voice sharp. "Can we not do this here?" I turned to face her, and something inside me snapped. All the years of silence, of swallowing pain, of pretending I was small and invisible, it all rose to the surface. "You're right," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "Let's do this properly." I walked to the center of the living room, the crowd parting around me. My son and daughter-in-law followed, their faces pale. I want everyone here to know something. I began, my hands steady despite the pounding of my heart. For 60 years, I've worked, I've sacrificed, I've built a life from nothing, and I did it quietly, without needing recognition or praise. I raised my son alone, put him through college, supported him in every dream he had, and when he brought home a wife who looked at me with disgust, I said nothing. When she mocked me for being poor, for living simply, for not having a mansion or designer clothes, I stayed silent. My daughter-in-law's face was scarlet, her hands clenched at her sides. My son looked like he wanted to disappear. But here's the truth, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I'm not poor. I never was. I'm worth over $8 million, built slowly over decades of careful saving and investment. And my son was in my will. Everything I had was meant for him. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. My son's face went white. But recently, I made a change. I removed him and his wife from my will entirely, because I realized something important. You don't reward cruelty. You don't reward people who only love you when you have something to offer. My daughter-in-law stepped forward, her voice shrill. You can't do that. After everything we've done for you, what have you done for me? I interrupted, my eyes locked on hers. Tell me, what have you done besides mock me, exclude me, and treat me like I was worthless? She sputtered, unable to form words. My son reached for my arm, his voice breaking. Please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. It's too late, I said quietly. You had every chance to love me when you thought I had nothing. You chose differently. David appeared at my side, his presence grounding me. Are you ready to go? He asked softly. I nodded, taking one last look at my son's devastated face, at the room full of people who just witnessed the unmasking of greed and manipulation. As we walked toward the door, my daughter-in-law's voice rang out, desperate and venomous. You're going to regret this. You'll die alone, bitter, and forgotten. I paused at the threshold, turning back one final time. I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who only see my bank account. We left together, David's arm around my shoulders, and as the door closed behind us, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. The weeks that followed were quieter than I'd expected. No more phone calls, no more desperate texts, no more showing up at my door with hollow apologies. My son and his wife had finally understood. I meant what I said. At first, the silence felt heavy, like a weight pressing on my chest. I'd spent so many years being a mother, defining myself by that role, that letting it go felt like losing a part of myself. But slowly, day by day, the weight lifted, and what replaced it was something I'd never allowed myself to feel before: freedom. David and I spent our mornings at the cafe, sharing coffee and stories, laughing at things that didn't matter and talking about things that did. He introduced me to his friends, warm, genuine people who welcomed me without question. We took long walks by the lake, visited art galleries I'd never had time for, and sat on his porch watching the stars. One evening, as we sat side by side in comfortable silence, he turned to me and said, "You're different now, lighter." I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. I feel different, like I finally stopped carrying someone else's expectations. He kissed my forehead gently. "You deserve this, all of it." But there was still one thing I needed to do. The following week, I met with Mr. Harrison again, this time to finalize the charitable donations. We sat in his office, the same leather chairs, the same smell of old books. But this time I felt no sadness, only purpose. I've chosen 3 organizations, I told him, sliding a list across the desk. A women's shelter, a scholarship fund for single mothers, and a community center that provides resources for families in need. He read through the list, nodding with approval. These are excellent choices. You'll be changing lives. That's the idea. He paused, looking at me with the kind of respect I'd rarely seen in anyone's eyes. You know, I've worked with a lot of wealthy clients over the years. Most of them spend their lives hoarding, protecting what they have, terrified of losing it. But you've spent your life building something just so you could give it away. That's rare. I shrugged, feeling a lump form in my throat. Money doesn't mean much if it doesn't serve a purpose. I learned that the hard way. The papers were signed, the donations were made official, and I walked out of that office feeling like I'd finally completed something important, not just for myself, but for all the women who'd been where I'd been invisible, exhausted, undervalued. That weekend, David invited me to a small gathering at his house. It was nothing fancy, just a backyard barbecue with a handful of friends. But as I stood there, plate in hand, surrounded by people who saw me for who I was, I realized something profound. This was family. Not the blood kind, but the chosen kind. The kind built on respect and kindness and shared humanity. A woman named Clara, one of David's longtime friends, approached me with a warm smile. David's told us so much about you. He's really happy. I felt my cheeks flush. He's been wonderful. I'm lucky. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Between you and me, I've known David for 20 years, and I've never seen him this happy. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. We both laughed, and in that moment, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't known in years. But peace, I was learning, doesn't mean the absence of challenges. It means facing them with clarity. A month after the party confrontation, I received a letter. It was from my son, handwritten, the paper creased like it had been folded and unfolded many times. I debated throwing it away unopened. But curiosity and maybe a small, stubborn hope made me sit down and read it. The letter was long, filled with apologies and regrets. He wrote about how he'd been blind, how his wife had influenced him more than he'd realized, how he'd taken me for granted. He said he understood why I'd removed him from the will, that he deserved it, and that he didn't expect forgiveness. But the part that caught me, the part that made my hands tremble, was the ending. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Not for the money, I know that's gone, and I accept it. But because I miss you. I miss my mom, and I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize what I lost. I set the letter down, tears blurring my vision. David found me sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in front of me, my emotions tangled and raw. What do you want to do? He asked gently, sitting beside me. I don't know. Part of me wants to believe him, but another part of me is afraid. Afraid that the moment I let him back in, it'll all happen again. David took my hand, his touch steady. You don't have to decide right now, and whatever you decide, it doesn't change who you are or what you've built. You get to choose what's best for you. His words settled over me like a blanket, and I realized he was right. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to choose out of obligation or guilt or fear. I could choose based on what I wanted, what felt right for me. A few weeks later, I agreed to meet my son, not at his house, not at mine, but at a neutral place, a small park where we used to go when he was a child. He arrived early, sitting on a bench, looking older and more tired than I remembered. When he saw me, He stood quickly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His eyes red-rimmed. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. We sat together in silence for a long time, watching children play on the swings, hearing their laughter echo through the crisp air. Finally, he spoke. "I've been going to therapy, trying to understand how I became the person I became, and I've realized a lot of things I'm not proud of." I said nothing, letting him continue. I let her control me because it was easier than confronting my own weaknesses. I let her treat you the way she did because I was too much of a coward to stand up for you. And I convinced myself that you were fine, that you didn't need me, because it made it easier to ignore you. His voice cracked, and he wiped at his eyes. I was wrong about everything, and I know I can't fix it, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm sorry. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. I appreciate the apology. I do, but I need you to understand something. I didn't remove you from the will to punish you. I did it to protect myself, because I realized that the person I was trying to leave everything to didn't exist anymore. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand. We sat together a little longer, and when I stood to leave, he looked up at me with desperate hope. "Can we try?" he asked. "Can we start over?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Maybe, but it'll take time, and it has to be on my terms." He nodded again, his relief palpable. "I'll wait, however long it takes." I walked away from that park feeling something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, exactly, but the possibility of it. And that felt like enough. David was waiting for me at the cafe. 2 cups of coffee already on the table. He smiled as I sat down, and I realized, in that moment, how much my life had changed. I wasn't the invisible woman anymore, the one who sacrificed everything and received nothing. I wasn't defined by my wealth or my poverty, by my past or my pain. I was just me, and for the first time, that was enough. The months that followed were filled with new experiences. David and I traveled to places I'd only seen in magazines, small coastal towns, mountain retreats, art museums in cities I'd never dreamed of visiting. I donated time and resources to the charities I'd chosen, meeting women whose stories mirrored my own, offering them the support I'd wished someone had offered me. And slowly, carefully, I began rebuilding a relationship with my son, not the one we'd had before, but something new, something built on honesty and boundaries and mutual respect. One afternoon, David and I were sitting on his porch, the sun setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and he turned to me with a question in his eyes. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" I thought about the question, really thought about it. The years of sacrifice, the heartbreak, the confrontation, the loss. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret any of it, because all of it led me here, to this moment, to you, to the life I've built for myself." He smiled, pulling me close. "Then it was all worth it." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire, I knew he was right. And if this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you.